Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to the last panel. I'm here with Amy and Ben, and I'll let them introduce themselves when they answer the first question, because we're slightly short on time. But before we do that, we wanted to just present some data that we have on smart or flexible working policy. So they should be coming up on the slides behind. There we go. So before I do this, you're not supposed to do that, are you? Supposed to talk and then show the slide. So the data that we collect as a consultancy from asset managers shows that about 91% of firms have smart working or flexible working policy. So who is that 9% and what are you doing, first of all? When we look at that data split by firm size, what you'll see is that as the number of people that work in an organisation increases, you're more likely to have a flexible working policy, which I don't think is that surprising, but it's just a data point to bear in mind. The next one is the link between flexible working and specific diversity demographic metrics. So this is gender, and this shows the number on the left-hand side, or my left, the percentage of females within investment teams at investment firms. So both those numbers are small, but the firms that do have smart working or flexible working policies have almost double the amount of female representation in their investment teams. So significant. Here we've got we cover socioeconomic diversity, and we also looked at ethnic diversity. And again, these aren't causation, it's just a point to consider. And what you can see, it's here. What you can see is that, again, those that do have a smart working policy are 25% of those review ethnicity and pay, or ethnicity in relation to pay, versus 8% that don't. So again, there are differences. And when it comes to socioeconomic diversity, again, so 31% of those which do have a smart working policy track metrics relating to socioeconomic diversity versus that's 8% again that don't. So the smart working and flexible working is linked and is related to a number of diversity factors. The stats when we ask people across the industry are, so 63% of women say that it's important versus 57% of men. And 67% of those from ethnic diversity, ethnic minorities say that it's important versus 59% white. So all the statistics are summarising and bringing us to the conclusion that smart working is something that we need to sort out and fix and do better at to help promote diversity within our own workforce. And with that, I'm going to ask our first question, which is, what have we been doing well? What's happened? How are we doing when it comes to smart working? And please introduce yourselves as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Butterworth. I'm Consultancy Director for an organisation called Timewise. We are a social consultancy firm, and we are really focused on providing services to organisations that want to design and implement effective, flexible, smart, agile working policies, but more importantly, practices and behaviours within their organisation. And yeah, thank you for having me today, and thanks for highlighting the really important link. I always say flexible working, smart working, it's not an end in itself. It's about how does it link to the strategic goals, and clearly there's a really important correlation that you're pointing to here around diversity. So I think the question was, what has changed? What have we been doing? What do we see? It's quite hard to answer this question without talking about COVID. I'm sorry, at some point we will stop that as a reference point. But in terms of ways of working, alternative ways of working, new ways of working, we've definitely seen a shift. I think if you asked probably most people in this room maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago about alternative ways of working or flexible working, you would think part-time. I think what has happened since COVID is we now conflate that phrase often with hybrid work, with working from home. And that is definitely a leap forward. Roles that previously had to be done in the office can now be done at home. And we've seen great progress with firms overcoming some of the tech issues, some of the compliance issues or barriers that might have been in place prior to COVID. So yes, there has been, movement, but we are now also seeing a row back on that, quite a vocal row back on hybrid working from some organisations, including those within savings and investment industry, people mandating a return to office, people talking about linking in-office presence with things like bonuses. So there is evidence of a shift there. We run a flexible jobs index at Timewise, which we do annually, where we look at the number of vacancies, and we produce an annual report, and we say what proportion of those vacancies are advertised with some form of flexible working at point of advert. Each year we do see progress, so we do see employers posting more ads, and we had a significant jump after COVID, but we've just published this week, this year's figures, or the figures for this year, and they've only moved 1% since last year. So only 1% more roles are being advertised with flexibility at point of hire. So I think it's fair to say the pace has slowed. I think what has also shifted alongside that is employee expectations, and that does leave us with a bit of a mismatch. So I'm sure some of you will have seen headlines. A KPMG survey earlier this year found that 64% of CEOs were predicting a full return to in-office working for everybody by 2026. And an EY survey a couple of months earlier found that given the choice, half of employees would prefer to work no more than one day in the office. So you can see we're poles apart there. So yes, things have changed. There are things that are working around hybrid ways of working, but still more to do.
Well, really well said. Thanks, Amy. I'm Ben. I run my own small recruitment business, so I'm very privileged to have a very unique window into both what companies are offering and what employees are demanding. And I think, to take Amy's point there is clearly a mismatch between what the expectation is from employers and what employees are looking for. But where we are at the moment is a really difficult point in the asset management industry, because we have an absolute headwind of challenges in front of us. And it does mean that things like diversity, inclusion are really put on a back burner, because they're not seen to be the money generating activities that drive these firms forward. We've already had some really great conversation on these areas, and I think there have been some absolutely fantastic points that have been made, but it is clearly linked. There is a clear link between making sure that companies are offering an attractive proposition to people that they're bringing in and people that they have in their company, and that really affects how they create a really interesting, inclusive, innovative workforce. Because what we run a risk of is becoming, as an industry, an echo chamber and losing a lot of great talent within tech, within change, within all the areas of investment management to other industries, because there are other industries that have gone out there and done this better. And we are still working out what to do and what looks right. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think, in fact, there's a clear mismatch between the expectations of the employer and the expectations of the employee. And personally, where I think this has gone wrong, and it's something that's affected me in my career, I've found myself having to leave roles because they just would not accept the degree of flexibility that I needed. And as a last resort, that meant that I set up my own company. And I actually completely withdrew from that mainstream corporate culture. And is that really where we are? Is that where we're going? That's a question that I wanted to ask you. But I think, for me, where bigger industries really get it wrong and bigger asset managers really fail is that they have a very strong agenda, which is to put on their employees and their groups a one-size-fits-all solution. And that could be, and that manifests most in the return to the office, and it's X number of days a week in the office. And that, to me, really creates a very difficult dynamic between the employer and the employee, because there's obviously a negotiation that needs to happen, and one voice in that conversation is a lot more powerful. So having events like this today, I think are really important to keep that conversation going, especially when it's looking like these are the topics that may well fall by the wayside whilst we face these more challenging headwinds in the industry.
Thanks, Ben. And I think that's a good point. What does 3 days in the office mean? Usually there's not much thought or strategy behind it. You know, do you mean that you want new joiners to come in every single day for the first 4 weeks and their line managers because of X, Y, and Z? Do you want senior leaders to be in for these specific days so that people have a chance to go and speak to them? I think that's also what's lacking. Question behind me that we wanted to ask everyone, which is, has your line manager proactively, so not you asking your line manager coming up to you and asking you about your flexible working requirements? And a few people have responded, but I'll give it a second. So this is proactive. So don't give your employer credit where it's not due. Okay. Oh. I mean, it might change, but that's pretty bad. That's pretty shocking. Bearing in mind that we had a year where everyone was working from home. So just a point to consider. Okay. Thank you. Can we leave that up there just so if people want to respond over time? Brilliant. In the hashtag of today is what works. So that's our second question. How do we fix this? What's the solutions? What have you seen in the businesses that you've worked for that have been a success?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I think probably off the back of the poll, the first thing to suggest is that you talk to your employees. So I think the organisations that are doing this well are the ones that are speaking to their employees, not just via a survey. So don't just stick a question in your annual survey about satisfaction with flexible working arrangements or work-life balance. Actually, make sure that your managers feel equipped to have meaningful conversations on a regular basis, like you would about any other element of somebody's work. I think that in order to move on this issue, we really need to think more broadly. So we need to move away from thinking about flexible working or, alternative ways of working as being a women's issue or a parent's issue. We need to focus on a much more inclusive conversation, something that we would call reason neutral. So it doesn't matter why you're asking. It shouldn't matter why you're asking. Male and female, caring responsibilities or not, junior and senior roles. The earlier panel talked a little bit about the importance of allyship and advocacy. And so I think actually, showcasing, finding those examples of people who are making it work, showcasing those, talking about those, celebrating them, as well as having a good policy that makes it clear that it's for everybody and reason neutral. That is, that's a good place to start if you don't feel that you're already in that place. Another thing is just, and this isn't an easy thing to do, but for those of you in the room, for those of you who are at home who manage staff, ask yourself whether you trust your staff. Okay? Because if you trust your staff, why would you not trust them to work in the way that is going to enable them to do their best work? Stop thinking about, an alternative way of working as a kind of perk to be earned. Think about what's the win-win here. So there probably, in many cases, will be a strategic value to working in an alternative way to the wider team, maybe to the service. It might enable other people within the team to step up and cover if somebody's not around for some of the time. Or it may mean that actually you change some of your service delivery hours or mechanisms because there's somebody who wants to work slightly alternative hours. So having quality conversations that start from a position of trust can help you work out a way of working that doesn't feel like you're kind of granting a request to a valued employee, but is much more of a win-win, much more of an adult-to-adult conversation. And then the third thing I would mention is we know that it really works if you can make a proactive offer of flexibility, a really clear offer at the hiring stage. So I mentioned earlier that we do this vacancy tracking. Many of you will know there is new legislation coming in at some point next year, which means that anybody, for any reason, will have the right to request an alternative way of working from day one of employment. We at TimeWise have done some research which shows that just under 50% of people say they would use that new right. But actually, when we then look at the differences amongst different groups, there's quite a disparity there. So, for example, younger workers are more likely to say that they'll use it than older. So 54% of 18 to 34-year-olds versus 39% of over 50s. Black workers are more likely than white workers to say they will use it, 71% versus 48%. So again, to your original point, Sarah, about the link here, offering flex proactively, being open to conversations about different ways of working from day one can definitely help you attract a more diverse group of people into your organisation. I was saying to my colleagues on the panel earlier that I was speaking to an employer recently who has been running a trial of the 4-day week, and I was asking them how it had gone, and they're really positive about it. And I said to them, oh, great, you're going to be able to start attracting people in on that basis. And they said to me, oh no, we won't want to do that because we don't want to attract the wrong type of person. And this is a company that has just put time and money and effort into doing a trial of this stuff. And yet there's still that pervasive view, which is, that's only going to fly in their face. Some of you will have seen a case study. It's a great one. Zurich opened up all of their roles to part-time or job share or full-time flex, and they had a 66% increase in applications off the back of doing that. The demand from women for part-time roles showed an 83% increase. So we know what works. It's not necessarily easy. It may require some challenging conversations, but if you can get your managers, those who are responsible for hiring and recruiting and attracting people into your firms to take this seriously, then there's a real win for your organisations there.
Thanks, Amy. Ben, any comment on that?
Well, that's really difficult to follow on from because that was just so great and you covered so much. But I could link this conversation that we're having back to the first panel conversation. And I think if you are unsure what to do, the best thing to do is just to listen and to ask, because it's such a nice feeling to be consulted and to feel like you have a voice at the table. Even if it doesn't result in vast or seismic change, I think just the act of listening and appreciating your staff is hugely powerful. But also trust. I think trust is really important in this dynamic. And if you link it back to the recruitment process, there are some quite incredible fees that recruiters do charge their employers. There is a statement of intent when you're making a hire. You're putting your money where your mouth is, but are you putting your trust there too? I think that's something to reflect on, something to take out. What was really interesting about this part, the what works part, is when I went out to people that I knew, chief people officers, heads of HR, there were so few good examples that I could bring here. And I was really hoping to get some content because I was hoping it would write itself for me. But I've actually had to really do a lot of trawling to try and find some tangible things that do work. Amy's pointed out a couple there. And we can all go over what doesn't work and the things that we've been seeing on LinkedIn time and time again. But some of my clients, some of the firms in the asset management space are still doing this. I think mandated days in the office just don't work, especially if people are coming in and finding that there's no one else in the office. They're just coming in for the sake of it. And for global businesses, when you have Teams calls or meetings happening with Asia, with America, is it really a good use of that person's time to come in at really antisocial hours to take those calls when they could be probably better doing them at home? I think this is where it comes down to listening. One of the really big flaws that I did see was, and by highlighting the what doesn't work, I hope we're also talking to the what does work. But we had a firm who brought in a load of consultants to do a similar role in a transformation program that was vastly staffed with permanent employees. And those consultants were granted the working policy of their firm, which was vastly different from the host firm that was using them. So it created a real discontent amongst staff and as a result, you know, I often get calls, people moaning. These are the classics that people come to me with. But look, the real money shot here is what does work, and Amy's already given us some great examples. But I think what we really need to come to terms with as employers, as hiring communities, is this shift from line of sight management. It's all very Victorian, it's all very warehouse, it's all very Dickensian sometimes. And I think we need to be much more of an outcomes focused industry and put the trust in the people that you're hiring to deliver those outcomes. It's really important, and we have now got the technology that can support this. One phrase that I really like is this compelling event. So if you are bringing people to a single location, what is the compelling event for them to come in? Is it part of an agile transformation and a debrief of the pros and cons of that project? Yeah, sure, that's one thing. But don't just bring people in without there being a story as to why they need to be here. That needs to be really, really clear. And they were my takeouts.
Thanks, Ben. I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to the panel, to Amy, to Ben. Trust, and maybe thinking about future ways of working instead of being stuck in the past as well. So thank you very much.